Okay, here we are, part 2, in the Palace of Mirrors. So consciousness, I'm going to occasionally read from the written version of this because I'm trying to impart a lot in a condensed period of time. We don't have time constraints, but I don't want it to go on too long. I want to make sure that I'm cogent. So I'm going to from time to time, I'm going to read from my notes. So consciousness has many attributes, numerous powers, numerous functions, STDs nested within the seedy field of consciousness itself, right? Consciousness pierces through, analyzes, dissects. It dissects, it computes, it conceives, it creates, it remembers, it imagines, it illuminates, and it reflects. And I want to talk to you about this power of reflection. Consciousness aggregates, it elaborates, it extracts, it expands, it independently evolves knowledge. But in the context of this talk, I just want to talk to you about the power of reflection, what I mean by reflection, because it's a very powerful way of knowing. The great Sufi teacher Inayat Khan called the mind world a palace of mirrors, and that metaphor has always traveled with me in my journey, the power of mirrors. We mirror each other. We mirror each other. So you can see this in interspecies communications. Whether it's a wild animal that you encounter on the trail somewhere, or it's one of the four-legged species that have chosen for better and for worse to live with us, the cats and the dogs, whatever it is. You sometimes have this experience of the power of the palace of mirrors, the mirroring power of consciousness, the reflective power of consciousness. You see this in interspecies communications. When you just know, without you being able to speak gecko, and without the gecko being able to speak Homo sapien, you understand something. You communicate something. Bird to human, human to bird, fox to human, human to fox. You communicate something, and it's just there. You're not anthropomorphizing, you're not projecting on them. You understand something together. The feral cat in you, the little dog in you. Another example is with somebody you close to, whether or not they're a stranger or somebody you've known for your whole life, that resonance in your consciousnesses. That part of the way that happens is that there's a way to understand something by mirroring it. You're not reflecting it back. Don't think of it's not about reflecting it back to itself, but you are the mirror, and you're taking in what is before you, and in that taking in holding it, in accommodating it in the space of the mirror of your consciousness, there are ways you can understand that phenomena, that being, that person, that creature, that you couldn't possibly understand any other way. And this is the palace of mirrors. And so every consciousness is a palace of mirrors. And within every palace of mirrors is reflected the palace of mirrors of every other consciousness that encounters. And then every collective is a palace of mirrors of all the palaces of mirrors of all of the individuals within that collective. The city, the nation, the planet itself is a palace of mirrors containing all the palaces of mirrors of all the consciousnesses of all the species that it accommodates in the field of itself, in the field of Gaia herself. Palace of mirrors. It's a very powerful way of knowing. And I want to talk about this powerful way of knowing in the context, just for a moment. So we have this palace of mirrors. We are a palace of mirrors, each of us. And then you add to that the internet. The World Wide Web, that's an old term now. Cyberspace is an old term now because it's ubiquitous. The cloud is an old term now. It's all ubiquitous. Artificial intelligence will become an archaic term rapidly. It's ubiquitous. It's all around us. It's all pervasive. It's become, if the sixth sense is intuition, of course, the life of the senses is much more complex than five senses. But for argument's sake, we'll just say five senses, and then the sixth sense is intuition. Well, the seventh sense is what, for lack of a better word, we can call the internet. This extension of consciousness in time and space, really, both. You can travel in time and space. And so specifically, I want to talk about the Palace of Mirrors in the context of social media. And there's much that we could say negative about social media. We can talk about addiction. We can talk about how its various forces seek to control it. We can talk about how we can create our own little fantasy world within social media, and how it can serve our dysfunction. All yes, 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 yes. But that's not what we're going to focus on here. We're going to focus on some occult realities in the social media that I want to bring into this conversation in the context of the Palace of Mirrors and the extension of the Palace of Mirrors. And the first of these, but first, before I do that, I want to give you just some staggering, just because we're going to focus on Instagram in particular. These are recent statistics, but again, just recent. It's moving, always moving on. 1 billion people are using Instagram. 80% of the Instagram users are outside the United States, 80%. Most Instagram users are between 18 and 29. 95 million photos and videos are shared on Instagram per day. 95 million videos and photos per day. Probably more than that now. Over 40 billion photos and videos have been shared on the Instagram platform since its conception. And again, it's a recent statistic, but I'm sure it's outdated. And Instagram came and rose up and will go away and will be replaced by something else. But you understand the forward drift of what I'm trying to underscore here. It's a palace of mirrors, poured into by a billion palaces of mirrors, so that everything is out there, on there, in there, the good, the bad, the ugly, all of it, the stupid, the brilliant, the vain, the poignant, all of it. Just want to focus on three elements. And the first of these is Instagram yoga. So just like we could talk about everything that's wrong with social media, in general, we could talk about everything that's wrong with Instagram yoga. But I want to put all that aside for a moment, and I just want to just drop this one notion into your consciousness. So this is hashtag yoga, 61,048,707 posts. I looked that up recently. I'm sure it's much more by now. 61,048,707 posts. Now the power of asana is released in the Palace of Mirrors. There are several overarching themes in both words of power and I, the dragon. And one of those, the ascendancy of the feminine, altruism and sustainability as spiritual imperatives. And another one is what I call the yoga of evolution and the evolution of yoga. What do I mean by that? I mean that yoga is evolving on a global scale. It's no longer the intellectual property of one country. It is not the property of patriarchal and hierarchical traditions. It is evolving, and this evolution is being largely driven by women on a global scale, being driven by women, and in its initial phases being driven primarily by women in the West. I say the evolution of yoga and the yoga of evolution, they're intricately entwined. But by that, I don't mean that yoga itself is going to be somehow at the center of government or something. By that, I mean that those who are now moving towards places of power and influence in government, in business, in culture, in science, in all aspects of human life, a significantly higher percent of them are experiencing yoga as part of their journey. And yoga is in their bodies, in their 5 bodies. Yoga is in their 5 bodies. And these people have somatic intelligence, have access to somatic intelligence and somatic healing that those who have not had held and been moved by yoga in their bodies and by yoga and tantra in their bodies. They have a somatic intelligence than those who don't have access to that, have never had the good fortune of cultivating, right? So those people will change. Those people bring what I call the yoga of evolution. The evolution of yoga and the yoga of evolution. So I just want to read to you something from another second passage from I the Dragon about the power of asana. Again, the power of asana through 61 million plus and more images. The power of asana coursing through the palace of mirrors. The palace of mirrors of the palace of mirrors. The palace of mirrors of the palaces of mirrors. The collective. Each asana is a hieroglyph in the language of Soma. Each asana is a sacred symbol in the mantra of human embodiment. Each asana contains occult information. The asana knows more about you than you do. And it knows what it knows about you in a way that you are probably not used to feeling or knowing anything about yourself. Each asana has a message for you. It may repeat the same message over and over again, or it may bring forth a different message every time you settle into it. But whatever messages you receive, you will be in direct communication with a power beyond comprehension. When you enter into asana, a single, simple asana, any asana, you are entering into direct relationship with an infinite intelligence that has direct access not only to the full spectrum of your current physical state, but also to the entirety of your own soul's Akashic record, past and future, as well as to the sacred multi-dimensional repository of all divine wisdom from all the ages in all the worlds. If you listen to what the asanas tell you, a path will open up to you, a path of transformation, a path of healing and revelation. So what I suggest to you about Instagram yoga, in spite of everything denigrating and derogatory and critical one could say about the images associated with it and the vibrations, some of the vibrations that may be associated with some of it. What I just want to suggest to you, just hashtag Instagram yoga, 61,000 posts. Hashtag yoga, 61 million posts. Hashtag yoga every damn day, 15,300,000 posts. Hashtag yoga life, 7,600,000 posts. Each one an asana, each one a hieroglyph, each one shooting somatic intelligence, a message of somatic intelligence into the palace of mirrors, composed of all the palaces of mirrors, and shooting off into each palace of mirrors that receives that image. Each time you do an asana, something powerful happens, and I suggest to you that each time you even see an asana, something powerful is happening, whether or not you may or may not detect what it is for years, months, weeks, years. Something has happened, something has changed. The next the second of the three elements working in social media in ways you might not have considered concerns the selfie. The selfie, just like social media itself and just like Instagram yoga, we could go off on quite a riff, quite a derogatory and denigrating riff about selfie and the culture of selfie, and how many people have killed themselves trying to get the ultimate selfie in some dangerous place, and the narcissism or seeming narcissism of it. But what I want to suggest to you is to look at the selfie in the context of what I call the occult history of self-portraiture. So in the 19th century, or before, up to the 19th century and into the early 20th century, self-portraiture was primarily it was the realm of painters, really of painters. And the self-portraits that come to us are the self-portraits preserved because those painters, for whatever reason, were painters that survived the multiple gauntlets of the critics, of socioeconomic forces beyond their control, the gauntlet of their own psychological challenges, as every artist has. So the self-portraits we have from previous centuries are the self-portraits of painters. These are two of my favorites. This is Munch's Self-Portrait in Hell, 1903. And the great Frida Kahlo's, she calls this self-portrait very ugly, 1933. Two amazing self-revelations left behind by artists. But then if you move on, though, into the 20th century, photography adds another dimension to what self-portrait, another dimension to the field of self-portraiture, right? Because now it's no longer simply the painter, it's also the photographer who can capture something about themselves that someone else cannot, and by extension, anybody with a camera. But particularly, let's focus on the great photographers, Francesco Woodman, who I've written about extensively. And this is Diane Arbus, the great Diane Arbus' Self-Portrait Pregnant, 1945. And this, of course, is Andy Warhol's Self-Portrait, 1986. So you see a quantum leap forward in the power of self-portrait and the means of self-portraiture and the power, the scope of self-portraiture, right? But then we can take it farther to the selfie, because with the smartphone and with Instagram and everything else that's come to us, all our devices, we now live in a time where anyone, anyone with one of these devices can capture a self-image, a fleeting self-image, one that might never, would not otherwise be saved, countless of them, and see all the range of much that you could know or forget you knew about yourself in the context of your living in this world of social media, and share it nakedly and unabashedly. Share it share your self-revelation with others, and not only about yourselves, of course, but about the nature of your relationships, about your friendships, about those you love, and what those friendships are like. So an occult history of self-portraiture, from the great painters to the great photographers, to everyone, instantaneously. And again, shot out into the palace of mirrors, the collective palace of mirrors composed of each individual palace of mirrors. The third element operating in social media I want to just touch on briefly is the idea of FOMO. FOMO, fear of missing out. I have a young friend, one of the most impressive people I know, and we were walking her dog in the East Bay one afternoon, and she said that we were talking about social media, and she said, well, I'm not on Facebook much anymore. And I said, why not? And she said, well, FOMO. And I said, what is FOMO? She said, fear of missing out. And I thought about it. This is one of the most impressive people I know. We met on a golden dragon in the desert. Literally. In other words, we met at Burning Man. And it's in the few years, in the 5 or 6 now, 6 years that since we met, she walked away from a serious car accident in which her convertible turned over. She literally walked away. She survived 2 very challenging, challenging, dangerous relationships. She changed her career, became the valedictorian of her graduating class, and owns her own home. And I said, this person has fear of missing out? But of course, I contemplated it, and I began to understand what she meant, of course. And then then once the notion of FOMO was in my psyche, I saw it working on myself, right in there with the 4 Noble Truths and all of it, right? So FOMO, but just everything that you once experienced, that you can no longer experience, everything that you have never experienced and have always wanted to experience, but never will, everything you chose not to experience, and now regret having chosen not to. Everything, all of it, everything. In the course of scrolling through your Instagram feed, all kinds of emotions and psychological content arise. And in this arising, there's an opportunity to practice. This image is a friend of mine, Erin. We did yoga teacher training together, and this is a self-portrait she took of herself at this magnificent waterfall on Bali. She's a professional photographer and adventure leader and yoga teacher. So yes, so 21st, an opportunity to practice. So 21st century opportunities, 21st century reinterpretations of 2 very powerful aspects of practice. methods, techniques, practices, aspects of practice as a whole, like your approach to living. And the first is vichara, given to us by Ramana Maharshi whenever somebody would come to him, whoever they were, wherever they were going, whatever they wanted to, which is say, well, just ask yourself, who am I? And people wanted to know about the nature of reincarnation. He would say, well, ask yourself, who am I? Find the answer to that question. And when you found the answer to that question, come back to me. And if you still want to know what reincarnation is, we can talk about it. And or they would come to him and say, well, is it free will or determinism? Which is it? And he would say, ask yourself, who am I? And come back to me when you feel like you have the answer. And if you still have a question about whether it's free will or determinism, we can discuss it. But ask yourself, who am I? Wherever you are, whatever you're doing, not to separate yourself from experience. This is not neti. People misunderstand vichara, who am I, as neti. In the Upanishadic or Vedic, neti, not this, I'm not that, I'm not my body, I'm not my eyes, I'm not my face, I'm not my name. That is not what vichara is. In this moment, in these 5 bodies, with these eyes, with this hair, with this face, with this karma, with everything that I am and everything that I am not. What am I? Who am I in this moment? Not in namelessness or in name, but in both. What am I? Who am I? This practice cannot fail. That's why people miss its power. Because the answer to the question, who am I, is not an answer. It's the silence, almost, it would be more accurate to say it's the silence which holds the question and precedes the question, from which the question emerges, in which the question is held in its utterance, silent utterance, and in which it dissolves. Who am I? The answer is immediate. It's silent. It cannot be put into words. That's why we miss it. But it's very powerful. And however many times you practice vichara in whatever situations, not to separate yourself from the situation, but to be more fully in it. Very powerful. Cannot fail you. Only our disbelief makes it seem like it's something that doesn't work for us. The other aspect of practice that I want to touch on briefly is vichara, right? So you will read. If you were to look up a definition, you'd read, let's see. Dispassion, detachment, renunciation, indifference, and all the subsequent implications of those words. I suggest to you that that is not what vichara is at all. Vichara is not dispassion. Vichara is not detachment. Vichara is not renunciation. Vichara is not detachment. What I'm suggesting you that vichara is to say, to be able to remain present. To be able to remain present. To abide in the great peace of remaining present. To call it an inner peace would be misleading because that takes us back to this whole false dichotomy of inner and outer, right? And for that matter, peace and absence of peace. So let's just say it's a peace that it's like your own skin. A peace that moves with you, through all of it, through all of life, so you can be fully present with the greatest joy, fully present with the deepest sorrow, fully present. That's Vichara, fully present with the greatest joy, with the deepest sorrow, sometimes both in the same moment. That's what Vichara is. And yet to not lose that enwrapping skin of peace, even when you unravel it, even when you are skinned alive and robbed of that peace, you simply return to it. You reinitialize it, you reboot it, and you resume your practice. And you put in one foot in front of the other, leaning forward. That's Viraja. So FOMO brings us this opportunity to cultivate Viraja, scrolling through all that you once had and will never have, all that you always wanted but will never have, all that you could have had if only, all that you should have had except for, all of it, all of it, all of it. The places you will never return to, the places you want to visit but may never get to, the life experiences you have lost, the life experiences you have passed by, all of it, all of it. Whatever it is for you, it is an opportunity to practice, to cultivate true Viraja, which is not the pushing away of the greatest joy or the pushing away of the greatest sorrow. It's not a denial. It's not an extraction from. It's not an imposition of separateness from experience. To cultivate true Viraja, it's the memory, the echo, the reflection of either. It's simply being present with it, for it, through it, on and on and on. Viraja. What is Viraja? How do you practice Viraja? Simply being present with the deepest sorrow, with the greatest joy, with the mundane, with the sublime. Simply being present. And when you lose that sense of presence, simply returning to it. Viraja and Vichara. 21st century practices, 21st century reinterpretations of ancient future practices. So that's the second of these 5 sections that I want to go through. The next one is STDs, spiritually transmitted delusions. So I'm going to close out this segment, and in a few moments, I will start up the third movement of this 5 movements, the 5 movements of this presentation. I hope you join us for part 3, and again, a few moments.